It's time for another episode of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. I'm your host, Baxter Whitworth, and as always, joining me today is your other host, Paul Hayes. In this episode, we talk about cattle nutrition, cost management, and feed efficiency, plus more. Welcome to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast,
bringing you the innovative new ways of the cattle industry.
We're your hosts, Baxter Whitworth and Paul Hayes. Together, we're going to be interviewing leaders within the cattle industry.
Here on this podcast, our focus is honoring God and innovating the cattle industry. Get ready to listen, learn, and laugh as we help innovate the cattle industry.
Let's get innovating. Have you been looking for a place to buy top quality AI sire semen or collect a bull of your own? Well, look no further than Elgin Breeding Services. Located in Elgin, Texas, Elgin Breeding Service is not only one of the best breeding services in the business, but also has superior customer service. Contact them at ebsbull@elginbreedingservices.com or by phone at 512-285-2019. Again, that's 512-285-2019. And visit their website at elginbreedingservice.com. All right, Paul, how are you today?
I'm great, Baxter. How about you?
I am great, and I'm excited because we have been waiting to do a nutrition episode for a while now, which makes me even more excited to introduce our guest, Dr. Russell Carrell. How are you today, Dr. Carrell?
I'm doing good, Baxter. Thank y'all for having me. I've been keeping up with y'all and listening to every episode since y'all have kind of released this, so I'm really excited to get to be a part of it today, and hopefully we can have some really neat discussions about nutrition today.
Yes, sir. I'm excited for it. Paul, since we're all so excited, how about you help us get to know our guest today?
I would love to. What's one random fact that's always intrigued you going throughout life?
What's one random fact that's always intrigued me? Oh, that's a great question. Oh, so in my personal, I guess one of my hobbies is I'm a big outdoorsman. And so I've always been super fascinated with waterfowl migration patterns and what causes ducks to want to migrate and what makes them, what are the things that make them want to come back through the same spots in the same year. And so a random fact that kind of pertains to that is ducks actually use landmarks. And so they follow freeways and rivers and things like that when they're migrating every year. And so I find that to be very fascinating that a bird is smart enough to kind of know where it is based on landmarks when they migrate from Canada down to Mexico every year.
That's pretty neat.
That is really neat. I had no clue. I just assumed they kind of had people say you have a compass in your head. I figured they had something like that, but that makes sense. That's cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I hope everyone finds that as neat as I do.
I definitely do. That's really cool. And then I understand that you did go to a couple different colleges. Out of all the colleges you went to, which one was your favorite?
That's such a tough question. Every place I went to school had some unique things about it. I'll start off with say that each one had things that I loved about it the most. My favorite traditions were probably, I love the traditions of A&M and the 12th Man, Giga Maggies, but I think my favorite college town that I lived in was probably Auburn, Alabama. And when you go to an Auburn football game, their war cry is War Eagle. And so at the beginning of the football game, they have either a ball or a golden eagle, and they turn it loose from the top of the stadium, and it circles the football field, and the fans chant, "War Eagle, hey!" And the eagle lands at the 50-yard line. So I loved Auburn and love Auburn, Alabama, but I am a fighting Texas Aggie and a loud and proud member of the class of 2016.
Sounds great. I know a lot of people enjoy the traditions, but college also the campus matters a lot too.
It does, and you know, like I said, every college that I went to, which we can get into I call it my bus tour of colleges in the Southeast. All the colleges I went to, each of them had something really unique that I really enjoyed about them, and I'll just kind of always appreciate.
I was
Yes,
kind of
sir.
interested. What all colleges did you go to?
So I have degrees from Texas A&M University. My bachelor's is from Texas A&M. I have a certificate in ranch management from Texas Christian University. My master's is from Tarleton State University, and my PhD is from Auburn.
I think it's time that we can kind of move into the questions that we like to ask everybody just to kind of set the stage for the interview. So what events in your life have kind of helped you shape you to who you are today and get you to where you're at in the position you're in?
So there's a lot of things that we could talk about, but Baxter, I've kind of thought about this knowing that you're going to ask me this question. And so I think one of the biggest turning points in my life that put me where I am today was meeting your dad when I was 12 years old. So for the audience to know, Baxter's dad was my first ag teacher in high school and helped get me started in the cattle industry. And we remain close today. And if it hadn't been for your dad, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And so that would be a huge, big turning point in my life. And then I think the deciding to go to Auburn and to do my doctorate, I think would be another point in my life that put me doing what I am today and on the career path that I'm on right now.
So what made you decide to go to not to go to Auburn, but to decide to get a PhD?
So I never really thought about getting a PhD. It wasn't something that I grew up wanting to do and never really thought of it as an option. When I was doing my master's at Tarleton State, my plan was to graduate from Tarleton and then go my master's was in reproductive physiology, and I was going to go work in embryo transfer when I got finished with my master's. But I got approached by a professor at Auburn asking me to if I would consider a PhD, and it wasn't something that I really wanted to do, but she talked me into coming to visit, and I got on campus and met the people and kind of saw what I would be doing, and just kind of decided to take a leap of faith and to go try it and do it, and realized that my calling and my passion was in nutrition, and found that nutrition was an avenue for me to really serve producers on a day-to-day basis like I'm able to now.
That's pretty interesting because I know another nutritionist who thought he wanted to be a geneticist, and I know a geneticist who thought he wanted to be a nutritionist, and now you're a nutritionist, and you thought you were going to be in reproduction. So
That's right.
that's pretty neat.
That's right. I ask young people y'all's age all the time, what do you want to do when you grow up? They're, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, that's okay. I don't really know what I want to do when I grow up either. And I'm 31, so it's okay to change I guess if there's anything to take away from today, it's okay to change your mind and to try different things.
Right. So our next question, we really like it because depending on where you're at in the cattle industry, what different aspects you get to look at, and you're in the nutrition side of the industry, and so I think you'll have a real unique look into this question. And we want to know what selection traits do you look for when you're selecting cattle?
So when I'm selecting cattle, I want cows that are built and adapted to the environment that I'm going to make them live in. So we can talk about EPDs and pedigrees and phenotype and all those things are great. But if that cow is not built and not adapted to the environment that she's going to be asked to live in, then she's going to really have a hard time staying productive and staying profitable without a lot of external help. So for me, it's having, with us, I'm here in East Texas, and so for me, I want a moderate frame cow that's going to be able to withstand some heat, withstand some insect resistance, moderate milk. I don't want a really heavy milking cow that's going to take a lot of feed in the winter to keep her in shape. With our personal cow herd, we raise seed stock Angus, so we're more focused on having balanced cattle in terms of maternal versus terminal characteristics. But at the end of the day, we want cows that work in our environment and work for us, so that we're not working for them.
That sounds great. Cattle that are working for us so that we're not working for them. I need to write that down.
Absolutely. Sounds like you and Dr. Long have very similar. Our first episode's Dr. Long. You kind of had the same answer as him, and it's really true because you can't really take. I mean, Angus can work anywhere, but they're known for being hairier cattle, and I don't know how great they'd work down in the valley trying to raise them because they'd get real hot.
But you can do it, and so like it's something that they taught me really early on is have cows that fit your environment. But I'm also a big proponent of put your cows in an environment that they can win in. So if we kind of throw the cows off into the deep end and don't put them in a spot to win, it doesn't really matter what kind of genetics or breed type they are. It's tough on them. So it's give and take on both ends.
Yes, sir.
If you truly want your livestock to perform at their best, make sure to contact Vance Aaron, the owner and operator of AFL Livestock Solutions. Vance specializes in magnawave treatments that use pulsed electromagnetic fields, or PEMF, to relieve pain, swelling, and inflammation, caused to help your livestock feel their best. In addition to livestock, Vance can also help you feel better. His treatment works great on sore muscles and joints, along with other mobility issues. His treatments are FDA approved to treat migraines. Aaron Family Livestock Solutions has helped many exhibitors make it to the backdrop with their proven MagnaWave treatments. Don't miss your next backdrop picture. Give Vance a call at 903-720-3184. Again, that's 903-720-3184. Or find them on Facebook at AFL Livestock Solutions.
All right. Well, now we get into the part that makes your interview unique, the discussion questions. So we've talked about how you're in nutrition, and something that's always interested me is comparing the factor of nutrition to the factor of genetics. So what is the impact of nutrition versus genetics on cattle and their feed efficiency?
So they work hand in hand, Baxter. The way that I look at nutrition and its relation to genetics is that without one, the other can't really do its full job. So we can have the best nutrition in the world and really have our program dialed in and be precise and accurate with how we're distributing feed and how we're regulating intake and what our nutrient profiles are. But if the genetics of those cattle aren't what they should be, or they aren't really aligned for production, we're only going to get so far. On the other side of that coin is we can have the best genetic animal, the most superior genetic animal in the world, and if we don't have the right nutrition in place, those genetics are not going to be able to be expressed. So nutrition and genetics go together, and we've got to have both of them, and they're not mutually exclusive, right? So it doesn't, we've got to have them together to get our complete package.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right. So it's basically genetics provide the potential, and then feed fulfills that potential, or nutrition?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, there's when an animal's born, it's got so much potential to it, right? So that calf is capable of doing so much, whether it be from a maternal or a terminal aspect. But without the constant supply of macro and micronutrients, that animal is not going to be able to grow and develop and produce at the rate that it possibly could. So it's like you said, it's the genetics or the potential, and the nutrition helps us capture that potential.
All right. So I think now we can move into everybody's favorite topic, which is cost management. So what I've seen is that about 60% of ranchers' input cost is feed. So how can producers help reduce feed costs without sacrificing quality?
That's a great question. So when I talk about nutrition with my customers out in the field, I think of it very simply. So nutrition is kind of like a balance or a scale, right? We want it to be level. We don't want it to tip one way or the other. And on either side of the scale, we have the needs of the cattle and then the supply and the feed. And if our cattle demands outweigh our supply, those cattle are going to lose weight. They're going to lose body condition score. They're not going to breed up. We're going to wean less calves. We're going to have less money in our pockets, right? On the other end of that is if, okay, well, I'm going to fix that and I'm going to have way more supply than the cows need. Well, the cows are going to be in really good shape and they're going to be excess body condition and hopefully they're going to have really good reproduction rates, and you're going to have a really, really good relationship with your feed company. But again, you're going to have money going out that you might not need to be spending. So in my mind, the thing to do is to balance those two things and to make sure that we're getting the cows everything that they need and not spend a penny more after that. Because you're correct that the most expensive line item in a budget, especially on whether it be a cow-calf stocker or a feed yard, the most expensive line item is going to be the nutrition of that animal. So one of the things when people ask me why I want to become a nutritionist, one of the things I tell them is that we only brand once a year. We only breed cows for 60 days out of the year. We only, vaccinate. Hopefully we never treat those animals for being sick. The one thing that those cattle do every day is they eat. And so they're going to consume something every day, and we can have a ton of impact on them through their nutrition. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we can have the most impact on profitability by how we manage an animal's nutrition. And again, spending more than we need to isn't the answer, and starving the profit out of that cow isn't the answer either.
That's nice. So you made me think of something I haven't really thought about before, but you obviously anytime you're working with somebody, you need to get to know them so that you can trust them, but you really need to get to know your nutritionist so that you can trust them because like you said, if you're putting out excess feed, you're gonna make your feed company pretty happy. So that definitely needs to be someone that you trust.
That's a huge point. So it's my job to earn the customer's trust. So I have to be a professional problem solver, and I have to be out in the field helping bring value to a producer. Otherwise, what reason do they have to trust me? If I can't show them some value, then I'm just another guy knocking on the door peddling some product, right?
Right. That's definitely true. Something else that I kind of brought out of what you said is the biggest you talked about wanting to do nutrition because they eat every day and the biggest impact on health is nutrition. So I can definitely see your point of view there.
Absolutely. And you're talking about the feed and how they might give them too much nutrients or give them not enough. And kind of elaborating on that, what's something that producers are wasting money on when it comes to feed? And you kind of answered that. I just wonder anything to elaborate on it.
So I think that there's not necessarily one thing that I would point out would be something that everyone's doing that they're wasting. I think that the mistake that I see a lot of times in the field is just not understanding what's in the feed that they have versus what the cows really need. So not doing things like conducting hay testing every year, or not taking forage clippings and understanding, what quality grass they have. If I had to talk about a mistake on nutrition, it would be stocking. So how many cows do we have per acre, and how is our stock density in relation to our carrying capacity in terms of total forage production? So that would be a mistake that I see all the time, that is something we can change without really spending a penny, and have impact, is just making sure that our stocking strategy is correct, and that we have good stocking rates that fit the needs of the cattle in terms of pounds of total forage to the pounds of production per acre from our land and our forage.
Have you been looking for Brahman cattle with a good genetic background? Contact 79 Cattle Company, selling reliable Brahman replacement heifers, Brahman show prospects, and Brahman bulls. Contact Taylor Tate at 210-241-4511. Again, that's 210-241-4511. Or contact Mallory Tate at 210-861-0155, 210-861-0155.
So, you talked about hay testing. Can you kind of elaborate on that? I know you have a little mobile device that kind of helps you with hay testing, and it's a pretty cool deal. Could you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So when it comes to hay testing, I see a lot of things out in the world, and one of the things that I'm a big stickler on is I don't judge hay based on its color or its smell or what it looks like, how easy it pulls apart. When it comes to how valuable hay is to a cow, it all comes down to the chemical composition of that plant. So when we think about what forage is, it's a fibrous feed source that monogastric animals aren't capable of using. So you have, and the animal that's consuming it has to have some form of fermentation in their digestive tract to be able to break down that forage to generate things such as microbial crude protein and energy via volatile fatty acids. So I don't look at hay color. I don't look at the smell. I want to know how much fiber is in there, how much protein, how much energy, and kind of use that to determine. So I've got an NIR machine where I can sample hay out in the field and can determine things like crude protein and neutral detergent fiber and acid detergent fiber within about 5 minutes, as opposed to having to take the sample and put it in a bag and send it to a lab somewhere and wait for those results to come back. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to make immediate decisions for my customers and helping them make the best decision on, okay, is this hay going to be enough for your cows? Does it have enough protein? Does it have enough energy to where we don't need to go out and we don't need to buy any cubes, or we don't need to buy any lick tubs or anything like that? Or if I can scan it and go, wow, this is really deficient in nutrient XYZ, typically it's going to be protein or energy. And we can make decisions and be really precise and really accurate based on that hay test. Without a test, it's just a guess. So that's a really simple way to remember it and really kind of drive home the value of knowing what you got. Okay. We can't manage what we don't measure. And so the first step is, before we can really make a management decision, we have to go out and we have to measure and see what we've got.
Oh, that makes sense. We can't manage what we don't measure. I like that.
Absolutely. And did you say that was an NIR machine?
Yep, NIR. So near infrared spectroscopy. It's hard to say. And so what that does, Paul, is it shoots infrared light through the forage and that forage refracts some of that light back to the device, and then we're able to build regressions and predict things like crude protein based on the light that's refracted back to that machine. It's kind of complicated, but whenever you see it in person, it's really a simple machine to use, and pretty user friendly when it comes down to it.
Yes, sir.
And what benefits does hay have on feed efficiency?
So we got to think about what kind of animal are cattle. They're ruminants, so they have that four-chambered stomach that uses that microbial fermentation that we talked about. So if we exclude hay or roughage from the diet, we're taking that ruminant animal and we're turning them into a monogastric. So they'll be more feed efficient if we remove forage from the diet. But the reality is that that's going to have a really negative impact on the health of that animal. So feed efficiency, it's driven by a lot of factors, genetics being one of them, kind of going back to that, as well as the intake pattern of the cattle. Are they eating one or two big meals a day versus they're getting small snacks throughout the day? So there's a lot of things that go into it, but my big thing is that cattle are ruminants and cattle are designed to eat grass. So we should let them do that.
Another question we kind of had about feed efficiency was what makes different feeds more efficient than others?
So the thing that's going to make a feed more efficient than something else, and I think we have to define what efficiency is. So if we're talking about feed to gain ratio, the thing that's gonna decrease that feed to gain ratio is going to be the amount of energy in that feed. So if a feed has less percentage of things like forage, whether that be hay or silage, or other roughages such as cottonseed hulls, if it has more of that, the cattle are going to be less feed efficient on something like that than they would something that's going to be more energy dense, right? Something like corn or soy hull pellets or milo, or rice. The thing that we have to consider is it's too much of a good thing is never a great thing. So if we pack too much energy into that animal's diet, we run the risk of causing ruminal acidosis, which in the long game is going to really kill any kind of feed efficiency if they're not feed efficient at all. If their stomach hurts so bad they won't eat anything.
Wow, just throwing off good quotes left and right. Too much of a good thing is never a great thing. I like that.
Sounds like me with candy. If I eat too much of it, I won't want to eat anything at all.
That's right, and that's Paul. That's an example that I use all the time. Is Snickers bar is I'm pretty big fan of a Snickers bar, but if I sit down and you put a pile of them in front of me and I eat them all at one time, I'm gonna have a stomach ache, and I'm gonna be very efficient with the calories that I used, and definitely gonna have to watch my waistline. But there's some negative consequences to that, right?
Absolutely. Can we just kind of talk about the future of the beef industry or the feed industry, really, and especially when it comes to what you think it'll look like in terms of making our feed more feed efficient?
So one of the things that I'm seeing is that we are creating cattle that, regardless of their breed type, or where they're coming from in the world, they are tending to be able to do more with less. So you talked about on the last episode, I think, that our cow numbers are at record lows compared to the past 40 or 50 years. But if you think about it, or if you look at the data, we've maintained or really increased the pounds of beef that are being produced with less cows. So that is coming from animals that are more efficient. And so that again ties back into the genetics. But as far as the nutrition goes, I see the industry just moving more and more to manipulating and understanding the growth and the genetics of those cattle to get people that high quality product that they want to pick up off the shelf, whether that be at a grocery store from a company that that was packed by a company like Cargill, or from your local farmer feeder. Like I said, I see the industry moving towards more precision feeding and understanding things. We have the technology now where we can measure every ingredient that's going into our mixer wagon, and we can see how long it took to clean up the bunks. We have the technology to put RFID tags in those animals' ears, and we can measure the amount of feed that an individual animal is taking every time they come to the bunk. And so with things like that, we get a better understanding of how genetics and behavior and the environment and how all those things tie into nutrition. Because when it comes down to it, as a beef cattle scientist, that's what I consider myself, is that everything's working together and working in unison to get us that end product. So on the nutrition side, I just continue to see more precision application of different technologies to get the producer that product that they want.
I think we need to give you an award. You're our first guest to ever reference a previous episode, I think.
I think so.
EP Cattle Company. Owned by Eddie Wilson, EP Cattle Company is home of Sir Rouse Handshake. Rouse Handshake is a sound-structured, heavy muscle bull that is really bold-ribbed. So it comes with no surprise that he is a Fort Worth and San Antonio Junior Show Division Champion and Rio Grande Valley Open Show Division Champion. He is a grandson of BRC Noble and JDH Shank Manso, and is also a great-grandson of Mr. H. Elijah Manso. You can contact Eddie Wilson or Nicole Wilson on Facebook at EP Cattle Company. So remember, if you're looking for some well-performing, registered Brahman genetics, contact Eddie Wilson on Facebook.
So a question that I kind of had that you made me think of just now was, I've heard that American cattle are typically better at residual, or typically have a lower residual feed intake, while exotic and British breeds usually have a higher residual average daily gain. Is that true, or?
So we have to be careful speaking in generalities like that, but really there is some truth to that. What I really look at more is yes, some of it is breed type. When we think about our American breeds, those are going to be different composites most of the time. I mean, you look at even a Brahman. A Brahman is really, it's a 4-breed composite. So those composites are going to have some level of hybrid vigor, right? And so, again, I bet you never imagined a nutritionist talking this much about genetics. But with that hybrid vigor, there's going to be some increases in some different kinds of efficiency. But what I really look at and see out in the field is it really goes back to frame size and age of maturity. So as those cattle increase in frame size, their feed efficiency tends to go down. And the trade-off with that is that with that increased frame size, we have more total red meat yield. So again, there's kind of give and take, ebbs and flows with everything. But in my mind, I don't work so much in the generalities of, well, American breeds of cattle tend to be more feed efficient than the Angus cattle or these Charolais cattle. They're cattle, and there are kind of curve benders and performers in every breed. It's each individual set of cattle is its own unique kind of case study to work on, and really it goes down to just making sure that you track your cattle's performance so that you can understand year in and year out, what they're doing well and what are some things that they're maybe not performing as well on, so that you can make some adjustments with your kind of your selection.
I can definitely respect that you don't want to speak in general. I'll just give up on that.
It's hard.
Thank you. Okay, next topic.
Friday evening, and we're still learning grammar.
You never stop
Paul.
learning that, guys. That never stops.
Yes, sir. All right. So our next question is something that I think, in my opinion, I could be wrong, is kind of a little bit of a deeper question, and you can elaborate as much or as little on this question as you want to. Can you explain the 3 volatile fatty acids and what those are and what they do, and kind of the subject of those?
And you make me get out my biochem notebook, Baxter. So you mentioned the 3 volatile fatty acids. So really, there's 10 volatile fatty acids. There's 10, but when we think about beef cattle production, it really comes down to three main VFAs is what we're going to call them, because volatile fatty acids a mouthful, right? So
Yes,
the
sir.
3 VFAs that we think about the most are going to be acetate, propionate, and butyrate. And those 3 are all going to be produced by different classes, different species of micro. All right, here we go. Bacteria, different microbacteria in the rumen when you feed them different things. So acetate is going to be produced more when we have a higher percentage of roughage in the diet. So more forage, more corn stalks, more cottonseed hulls, things like that. And that's going to be the volatile fatty acid that's produced at the highest percentage is going to be acetate. The next one is going to be propionate. Propionate is going to be produced by our amylolytic bacteria or our starch digesters. And really, we see more energy enter the rumen, we're going to see those starch digesters become hyperactive and they're going to produce more propionate. Propionate is really neat because it is the only VFA of the 3 that do not produce CO2 as a byproduct. So when we think about methane production, we think about greenhouse gases in cattle, propionate is the only one that does not produce some form of greenhouse gas. Both acetate and butyrate have methane and CO2 as byproducts of their production. And then butyrate's kind of the last one. It really doesn't have as much impact as the first 2, but it's something that, again, those bacteria are producing in the rumen. Along with, and you got to remember that when we think about what all the rumen is a very vast, it's its own world. We have bacteria that live in there. We have fungi, protozoa, archaea that produce things like those VFAs that help physically break down the feed that's in the rumen and those byproducts like methane. It's all its own big world, and when we think about feeding cattle, we're not feeding cattle, we're feeding microbes, and those microbes feed the cow. So it's really, really important. Good question. I hope I didn't get too deep.
I certainly don't think so. The more the merrier. So we'll actually kind of get back into this in just a second, talking about the relation of feed efficiency to methane emissions and stuff, and propionate also. So does that make propionate typically more desirable to the other 2?
So it's all about context, right? So what did I say produces propionate? Energy. So energy is going to come from things like starch and sugar. And remember, think about that Snickers bar. We put too much Snickers bar in our stomach, we're going to have a tummy ache. We put too much corn, we put too much starch, too much energy, not any fiber with it. We're going to produce a lot of propionate, but we're also going to produce a lot of lactate. Okay, and so you think lactate, lactic acid, that's what's causing ruminal acidosis. So we don't want that. So really, we want to always have a combination of all of them. As we change the relationship from acetate to propionate, though, we do increase the feed efficiency of that animal.
Good.
Hi guys, I'm your co-host, Paul Hayes, and I'd like to tell you all about my family business that has been going on for over 50 years now, and that is raising quality registered Brahman cattle. Our ranch is called Flat Rock Brahmins, and we have locations in Glen Rose and LaGrange, Texas. And we are here for all of your cattle needs. Whether it's needing show cattle, replacement females, or even a new herd sire, we would be happy to earn your business and watch our genetics excel in your herd. You can contact me by email at paulhayesv@icloud.com or my dad, who helps manage the ranch, at paulhayesiv@icloud.com or over the phone at 817-964-2752.
Now I'd like to talk about the most important nutrients for cattle, and obviously the most important nutrients is water. But besides water, what's the most important for cattle?
So is water the most important, or is it just the one that if they don't have it, they'll die the fastest?
I've always been told that it's most important. I'd like to hear your perspective on this.
So my perspective is that they are all equally important. So when we think about the nutrients, we're going to break it down. It's going to be water, protein, energy, fiber, and then vitamins and minerals, right? And so we've got to have, in order to have a productive animal that's, again, working for us, we've got to have all 5 of those. So, again, water is important because if it goes without water, it's going to die very fast. However, if it goes without energy, it's also going to die, and it's not going to be productive. It's just going to be slower. We think about things like vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals are the smallest inclusion, have the smallest inclusion of any of the nutrients in the diet. But when it comes to productivity, can have equally as large impact as water or crude protein or energy. When I'm balancing diets for my customers, protein, energy, water, really easy to get. Baxter, you live here in East Texas with me. When it goes to raining a lot, are you really worried about your cows having water?
Not really.
No. When I'm out in my hip waders, checking cattle and putting out hay, they've got plenty of water, right? But, Paul, I know you live out in Glen Rose, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it doesn't rain there as much. So you tend to be a little more worried about, okay, especially in the summer when it gets dry, do those cows have enough water? And so, yes, water is important, but in my mind, all of the nutrients are equally important, and it's our job to make sure that they're getting adequate supplies of all of them every day.
Wow, that's challenging the status quo. I like it.
It is, because I didn't know that. I've always been told that water's the most important. Obviously they're gonna die the fastest if they don't have that, but I don't know, everything, like even on tests for different things, like the San Antonio contest, the beef skeleton, that's what it is.
Well, when we're thinking about something like a skeleton test, I think that's a good answer. I think that's a good answer for that test. But like Baxter said, I like to challenge things and be a little different. So in my opinion, they're all equally as important. The one, if I had to say one was the most important, it's going to be whichever one we have the least of. Whichever one that cow's shorted on, that's the one that's the most important because we need to make sure that we supplement it to her.
Yes, sir. And I think, we'll get into that in a second, but we'll jump back into emissions and feed efficiency. And so can you just kind of talk about how feed impacts emissions, or just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So in the past 10 years or so, the general public has become aware that cattle emit greenhouse gases. The more efficiency that we can build into cattle, naturally, the less greenhouse gases they'll produce in their total lifetime, right?
Right.
So kind of my thought and what a lot of nutritionists believe is that when it comes to emissions, cattle aren't really producing a whole lot. So, most people think that the greenhouse gases that cattle are producing is coming out of the back end. The reality is pretty much all of the methane that's produced by cattle is coming out of the front end via eructation. So methane leaves the rumen, it goes goes up the esophagus. The cattle actually breathe the methane back in and then release it in an exhale. So they don't belch, they don't have flatulence to release methane. It's just naturally coming out of them. When it comes to feed efficiency, again, the more propionate we can produce, the less methane we're producing. So the more energy we give the cattle, the less methane and the less greenhouse gas they're going to produce. But again, it's all about context, right? So when it comes to our mama cows, do we want to be feeding our mama cows a bunch of corn year round?
No, sir.
Me personally, I'm not going to do that. I'm not saying that it's wrong if you do. I'm not going to recommend that to my customers, and I'm not going to do it with my own cows. If those cows produce a little methane, I'm going to live with that, because when we think about carbon production versus sequestration, cattle are they're net positive, because they're actually, by grazing those grasslands that they're grazing are actually sequestering way more carbon than a cow could ever dream of producing. So, we can make cattle, and when it comes to the industry, cattle in the feed yard is where a lot of our methane work is done. And that's simply because, one, we can control their diet and really control every bite that they take and try to mitigate any methane that they're producing. The cattle are very concentrated, but when it comes to the beef industry as a whole, I think we're needing to do a little bit better job of advocating that cows actually sequester much more carbon than they emit. So that's a long-winded answer to your short question.
So actually, I kind of want to break that down, what you just talked about. So he's talking about carbon sequestering. How do you say it? I've read it. I've never really sequestration. Okay.
Yep.
So now correct me if I'm wrong, but when cattle consume grass or whatever feed they consume, it's broken down, and eventually methane will be produced. But
Right.
that methane goes into the atmosphere and is through sequestration is broken down into the grass, right? It goes back into the dirt. Is that correct?
Well, so you got to think about it. Methane itself is the thing that the world is worried about, is just the carbon, right? So the
Right.
carbon itself. So when we think about methane going into the atmosphere, it's got a relatively short half-life. And so it's gonna dissolve, and that carbon's gonna pair with oxygen, and then it's gonna be CO2. Well, CO2 is what those plants are sucking in for dear life so that they can survive. And so we can grow that plant, and we can bring more carbon into the soil through the growing of that plant. And the cows just kind of serve as a way of helping stimulate that life cycle of that plant, right? They're going to go take a bite of grass, and then they're going to have all the things happening in their rumen, and then they're going to put a plop on the ground. They're going to put a pile on the ground, and that's just going to return some carbon into the soil. It's going to return some nitrogen in the soil. And so cattle really just work with the natural nutrient cycles that we have out in the world. And that's where I think cows are just great, because they're able to turn really the sunshine. So the UV light and the energy from the sun, we're able to take that and turn that into forage and turn it into crops. And then those cattle are able to eat it and turn that into steak, which is super fun. So you think about it in a really long chain of events. We're taking sunshine and we're turning it into ribeyes, which I think is pretty cool.
Time where it's like a calf standing there with a pile of grass near it and said, "My superpower is turning grass into steaks. What's yours?"
Yep.
That's absolutely true. And what people also don't realize is everyone thinks carbon or methane, and they hear that word and they automatically get the feeling of bad. They don't think it's good. Everything about that is bad, but it's actually vital for us to have that in our soil, and that's what cattle do. And so I think people when people start really understanding that, and the general population really understands that there'll be a different view on how cattle impact our climate, and cattle and conservation will actually start going together in people's minds.
Absolutely.
Top-notch cattle company, selling semen on high-quality registered red and gray Brahman cattle that are reproductively efficient, structurally sound, big-ribbed, heavy-muscled, and deep-bodied. Contact me at 903-649-9155. Again, that's 903 649-9155 or email me at bbwtopnotchcattle@gmail.com.
This has definitely been really interesting. I think we need to kind of move on to a different topic, but I definitely enjoyed kind of, I guess you could say, myth busting about methane and CO2. In your bio, I unfortunately forgot to read it, but in your bio, you talked about how you want the beef industry to work together as a whole to feed the growing population. So I guess we're gonna kind of talk about the nutritional needs in different contexts and of different parts of the beef industry. So how do you feed differently for a cow calf operation to a feedlot? I mean, and obviously one's terminal and one's either those calves are very young or the terminal calves are very young when they're on a cow calf operation, and then the other cattle on that operation are for breeding. So I know it's going to be different.
So one thing I want to make sure I leave you with is that even our best donor cows that we can dream up, and this is something that I got taught when I wasn't much older than y'all, is that you can have the best donor cow in the world, and at some point, unless she dies on the property, she's going to become hamburger. So even our breeding animals are all destined to enter the food chain. So when it comes to our stewardship and our stockmanship, we should really keep that in mind in how we take care of all of our animals, and that they're all eventually going to hopefully end up as a meal on someone's plate and providing someone sustenance. But when it comes to managing a cow's nutrition versus say a stocker calf versus a feedlot steer, it's going to be a sliding scale of forage to energy. Okay, so when we think about a cow and managing a cow's nutrition, our goal is to make sure that we give her the nutritional tools to make sure that she brings a calf to the weaning bin every year. So we talked about the biggest line item on a ranch or on a feed yard is going to be nutrition. The biggest driver of profitability on a ranch, on a cow-calf operation, is going to be reproduction. However, reproduction is more greatly tied to nutrition than it is anything else. If that cow is nutrient deficient, in terms of if she's energy deficient, again, she's going to lose body condition, she's going to lose weight. And if she's not in a good enough body condition, her body's going to tell itself, hey, you're not fit to sustain creating another life right now. So, managing and really just keeping those cows in condition and keeping them in an adequate energy supply so that they can get bred, have that calf, raise it, bring it to the weaning pen year in and year out. When we think about a stocker calf again needs to be on a very fiber heavy diet, whether it be grazing wheat pasture or ryegrass, or it's in a grow yard. It's a young animal. We need to build some frame on it, and we need to not get it too fat too fast. So we want to give it again a good growing diet so that it can reach its potential in terms of bone size and total skeletal size. And develop some muscle. And then finally in the feed yard, that's where we're going to kind of pour the coals to it, as I like to say, and really kind of push that system to try to get some fat on that cattle so that we can have our customers can have a high quality eating experience. So everything's different for each, or there's some things that are different within each sector of kind of the beef industry, from cow-calf to stocker to feedlot. But one thing that needs to be considered is that those cattle, the nutrition is contributing to the health and the well-being of that animal and not taking away from it.
So you just talked about keeping the cows conditioned on a cow-calf production. Could you talk about why you think it's best to have cows conditioned going through a breeding season?
So again, it goes back to her rate of reproductive success. The research is very clear that if a cow is in a greater body condition score, she's more likely to get bred, and she's more likely to bring a calf to the weaning pen the next year. So something I want y'all to think about, and I want the audience to think about, is that If a cow calves and she's not an ideal body condition score, it's going to take more calories, i.e. more money, to get her to a state to where she can get bred again. And if it's going to take more calories, that's going to take more time, and it's going to take her longer to recover from having that calf, and it's going to take her longer to get bred, right? Which is going to mean the next year she's going to have that next calf a little later. Well, if we do that for 3 or 4 consecutive years, eventually she's not going to cycle and she's not going to come in heat when the bulls are out, and you're going to have an open cow show up on preg check day. So every little decision we make has a lot of down the road consequences that we have to think about. That's why it's so important to make sure that day in and day out, those animals are getting the nutrients that they need at the specified amount that is going to generate growth and reproduction and things along those lines.
So your job is mainly customizing rations for people. Is that correct?
I do a lot of that, yes. I do build a lot of custom rations for people.
Right. Okay. When people contact you about wanting a custom ration, what are the first factors that you want to consider?
So the first things that I like to consider and that I like to ask are, one, what are we feeding in terms of what kind of cattle are we feeding? Are we feeding cows? Are we developing bulls? Are they feedlot animals? I need to know, what kind of cattle are we working with? The next thing I ask is, what resources do we have available? Are we going to mix the feed on ranch using corn silage and dry distillers grains and corn and mineral? Or do we need to build a limiter ration that's going to go in a bulk feeder? So I need to know what kind of cattle we have, what kind of resources we have available. And the last thing is I need to know kind of what the expectations are in terms of animal performance. What do you want these cattle to do? And typically, if I can get a good read on all three of those things, we can build a program to try to accomplish those goals.
That sounds good.
Absolutely. And you just touched on this, but how does the environment affect the needs of different feed rations?
So again, if we're talking about an example I'll use is if we've got a set of replacement heifers and they're out on pasture and they're in knee-deep Bermuda grass and they've got all the grass in the world that they can eat, they probably don't need a diet that's got hay or corn silage in it. They're going to get all their roughage from their grazing, and what we really probably need to do is just have a concentrate that we feed them at a small rate, so anywhere from 10 to 12 pounds, and to just kind of help drive some of that growth and some of that performance. On the other end is if you've got bulls that are in a dry lot, well, they've got to get forage and roughage from somewhere, so it's up to us to put it in the diet. And it's up to me to make sure that they're going to have enough roughage in that diet to maintain a healthy gut and to grow and develop into the herd sires that they need to be.
All right. Well, I think we got a lot of good information from that topic and how different factors play into feed. Okay, so I've really enjoyed this episode. I've definitely learned a lot about nutrition. I'm really happy that we got to talk about emissions and methane and kind of how that people have a incorrect perception of that. And I just really enjoyed this episode, Paul. I don't know about you, what you learned, but
Absolutely. Basically the same thing you said, because you just said all the topics that we went through, kind of. And I learned something different from every topic that we went through, and it was great.
could you just kind of talk how somebody could get in touch with you and how if they wanted some custom rations? I know you work in Texas as well as some of the Dakotas.
Yeah, so I am for Cargill Animal Nutrition. So the best way to get a hold of me is probably my email, which I bet we could probably easily share through the notes of the podcast, right, Baxter?
Yes, sir, we can do that.
Yep. So the easiest way to get in touch with me is email. And really, if you are anywhere in the Western United States, which you can kind of draw a line from Texas straight up to Canada and all the way west. I've done work for people from from Florida to Hawaii and was actually helping some people with our Cargill team in Mexico today. So really anywhere that there's cows, I can do my best to help you. And just reach out to me via email, and what we'll do is we'll see kind of what your needs are and what products that we can put in place so that we can utilize whatever nutritional advantages I can provide for you, and just start building that relationship.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Everybody make sure to like this episode and follow the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. Also, you can find us on YouTube and Facebook for social medias, and our email, what do you call it, Paul? The form for our email list should be in the description of this episode also, and then as well on Facebook. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone who's listening, and keep innovating the cattle industry. Infinity Cattle Services, owned by Chris Shivers, is glad to be a sponsor of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. Infinity Cattle Services, a unique, vision-driven, service-oriented company committed to developing successful revenue-producing cattle operations, is a full-service consulting and marketing firm specializing in Brahman and Brahman-influenced cattle. Contact them today to learn more about how they can assist you with locating cattle, cattle mating, sale management, marketing, communications, record keeping, data submission, and a wide array of other services. They can be reached at 713-202-1747. Again, that's 713-202-1747, or at infinitycattleservices@gmail.com. That is infinitycattleservices@gmail.com. Visit their website at infinitycattle.com, or check them out on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
I'm your host, Baxter Whitworth.
I'm your co-host, Paul Hayes. Remember our key verse, Proverbs 16:3.
Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans.
Thank you for listening.
Hello guys, thank you for listening to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. We want to make this podcast better, so if you would, please like this episode and leave us feedback in the comment section. Something else that helps make this podcast better is when you respond to the polls. So if you're able, please respond to our polls. Help us make this podcast as good as possible. Thank you, God bless, and have a good day.